Hello and welcome to Listen Up Lilith. My name is Lilith and it's time to listen up. We're going to craft your first sewing kit, the things that you need to get started in sewing, on a budget especially. Oh my goodness. Honestly, my main goal from this is to turn you away from buying those scammy sewing kits that they sell in store that say they've got everything you need. They really don't. You're paying more for the container than you are paying for the things that are in the product. It doesn't matter how much money you spend on the thing. It's cheap products that they're selling at an inflated price. So let's do it ourselves, okay? And this is also for the neuro-spicy bitches who see something cute on Pinterest, think that they can do it themselves, go and spend a ton of money on products because everything's out there. They're saying this is the best thing you need. You need this and that, this and that. They get the products, they try making the thing, they realize they're not perfect at it at the first time, so they put it all away until they forget about it. And then they move. And they realize, well, shit, how am I going to move all these things? I don't need them. This is for you. Alright, so we're going to get into the things you do need to get started. And I'm going to tell you the cost, and I'm going to tell you why you need it. But we're going to try and quickfire this because I spent most of yesterday trying to do this video. And I kept on waffling, so I realized we're going to do this really, really fast, okay? So the first thing you're going to want to pick up, some white or black, or both, thread, and some needles. Some hand stitching needles. The hand stitching needles are very different. I'm just going to try and show you as best I can, but yeah, they are just straight needles. If you end up picking them up in a plastic container, double check that they are not machine needles. Just double check. I've done that. I did that a couple of times when I got started. But yes, needle and thread. I mean, it's your go-to. It's where you start with sewing in general. I will always recommend when you start sewing that your first challenge is learning to thread a needle because I mean, it's tiny, it's really picky, and when you're starting out, you might be quite shaky with your hands, so learning to control a needle and thread, being able to handle them and getting the confidence to do that, that is crucial, especially no matter what project you go into. You're probably going to end up coming back to needle and thread just to finish some things off or to sew on a button or some sort of closure or anything like that. That usually requires hand stitching because they're so small and fiddly and your sewing machine can't do that. Yeah. Plus, this little packet of needles, I'm pretty sure I only picked it up for like 50 cents, and a spool of thread, at least for me, like this giant 5,000 meter spool of thread only actually cost me $1.80. So, less than $3 right there, and it's going to last so much longer. The next thing that I will always recommend is to get some scissors that you can dedicate to fabric. Now, these are cheap scissors, honestly. I picked these up so many times. They're like $2 each, and I haven't done this with these ones because these stay in my room, in my crafting room. That I will normally put something around them that I know that these are my fabric scissors. Once they dull down a bit and I really can't be bothered sharpening them because they're so cheap, that's when they become paper scissors or anything else scissors. But yeah, just you don't need to get the fancy scissors right away. You don't need to get like specifically fabric scissors. You can just get cheap stuff. Once they're fresh and brand new, they're perfect. But yeah, keep one of those nearby. And yes, keep them nice and long. You want to get long ones. That was dangerous. Because you can't cut fabric very well with the small scissors that come in those tiny kits. I'm sorry. Yes, they are more for thread, but you're gonna want one of these. $2 right there. Next thing I'm going to recommend that you have nearby is a seam ripper. Seam rippers, yes, I'm going to do that makeup thing. They have that little sharp bit there with how it's shaped. That little bit in the center is actually the blade. That's the bit that cuts the thread. It's not the pointy bit or the other bit. But of course, when you're learning, you're going to make mistakes. You are going to want to undo things and redo things over and over again. Getting a seam ripper is less than $2, honestly. This one came with my sewing machine. But yeah, $1, keep it nearby. You're gonna make mistakes. Best to be prepared. Okay? The next thing that I'm gonna recommend, the next couple things that I'm gonna recommend are more to help you, to learn, to support you, so that you know what you're doing. The first one being a fabric tape measure. Now this is a lanyard for me. I got a lanyard from Spotlight. Yeah, basic lanyard. I use this for my day-to-day work stuff. But yes, it's 1 meter long, so it's 100 centimeters or 40 inches, which is perfect. This only cost me like $5, but that's because I splashed down on a lanyard for a normal fabric tape measure, which will be longer than a meter. They're like a couple of dollars each, and they're plastic. They last for ages. They compact up really small, really easy to use. And I recommend a fabric tape measure, because if you're trying to work around curves and things like that, a plastic one, it's gonna move. It's gonna be really weird to work with. So yeah, thanks Pusheen. The getting a fabric tape measure is gonna be perfect and universal and just easy, handy to have. Just handy to have. And yes, before anyone asks me, these do match up to actual measurements. It's not just a gimmick. I've kept this for like a good few years now, and it was only, yeah, $5, something like that. The next thing that is going to support you in learning to sew and learning to hand stitch, no matter what you do, and you're going to end up using this later in your crafting career anyway. I say career, interfacing. Now this is iron-on interfacing. Iron-on interfacing has a gluey side. So this, well, I say gluey, but it's not like sticky, but it's a fusible fabric that will attach to your fabric and support and stabilize it, making it a little bit stiffer, make it a little bit easier to handle. It will hold your stitching a lot easier as well. You can visualize these things, you can draw on it, you can do what you want, and you don't need a lot to get started. I bought this bag of 1 meter by 5 meters of interfacing for like $8, but you can easily just get interfacing on the roll and get half a meter, and it's honestly, a little goes a very long way. A half a meter will probably last you quite a while anyway, depending on what projects you end up going into. But starting out, you really don't need that much, and it's only going to cost you a couple of bucks maybe per meter to get started, depending on where you go, and depending on if you end up picking up the name brand stuff that's always on display, or if you go for the lesser name brand stuff, the no name stuff, the generic stuff that's a lot cheaper. Honestly, go for the cheaper stuff. It's fantastic to get started. All of this emphasis is on to get started. Okay, so yeah, side note, I'm emphasizing iron-on interfacing and not sew-on interfacing, sew-in interfacing. The stuff is stiffer, but it doesn't have a side to fuse to the fabric, so it will not attach to your fabric and it won't become one. It will basically just be like holding two pieces together, and that's not going to help you as much. That's just going to make it tricky. Okay, now the last couple things that you need, the obvious one being fabric to get started. So this is broadcloth. If you remember from my fabric video, this is broadcloth. I like this a lot easier because it is stiffer, but this will always be my go-to when I'm teaching people how to sew for the first time. I get them to use this because it's stronger and a little bit more easy to handle. But on the budget, the cheaper version of broadcloth is poplin. Poplin, everyone knows poplin. It is the cheapest cotton that you can get. It doesn't stretch. It comes in a very wide variety of colors. Sometimes they can be a bit muted, but that is fine when you're getting started. But you don't even need to get fabric on the roll. My tip is always to go to the remnants bin. Now, my fabric store doesn't do them as they used to. They used to put the different remnants into a bag and sell them as like one bag of remnants. But as remnants got bigger and bigger, they started selling them individually. So it's a little bit trickier to find what you need, and there's a lot more options. But if you can find some cotton in the remnants bin, perfect. You don't even need to go to the remnants bin. You don't even need to go to the fabric store for this one. You could also go to a thrift store, find a pillowcase or some bed sheets, anything like that that's cheap. They're maybe $1 each. You can easily pick those up, give them a wash, and use that for practice. And then you're not wasting brand new products on your practice, on mistakes, on anything that you're learning, on all that kind of stuff. And for example, this was the container for my bed sheets, which I'm actually sitting on right now because I just picked these up from Briscoe's yesterday. Yay, 50% off sale. But yeah, you can easily just use bed sheets and things like that because it's fabric too. You can use that too. I mean, so many of my projects, I've done a couple of Regency gowns, I've done a few designs that are originally bed sheets, and it's perfect. It's just perfect. So you don't need to spend a ton of money on fancy brand new fabric. You can go for bed sheets if you need to, or go to the remnants bin. Okay. Now the final thing. Now this is just a. This one's more my preference, but you'll understand what I mean. So the last thing that I recommend having in your sewing kit getting started is tailor's chalk. Now this is different from sidewalk chalk because it is much more compact, it is much more pigmented, so with it being more compact it won't crumble, and it won't like dust up all over your garments and things like that like normal sidewalk chalk would do. When you feel it, you can feel just how smooth it is, with it having the straight edges. It's a lot easier to trace on, and I recommend this over like pens and things like that, like ballpoint pens or coloured pencils and things like that, only because it is designed to go on fabric. So when you give it a wash, once your project is done, you give it a wash, if it still has the chalk on it, it will go away. It will show up on most, if not all, fabrics, depending on the colour you use. They mostly come in white, yellow, red and blue. As well as, with it being easier to handle, it's just nice to have just to fix things up and to visualise where things are going to go. I recommend that over pens, like ballpoint pens, or coloured pencils, because yes, they are easier to handle with the longest, I mean, this is not a pen, but with the longest stick to hold on to, but they are easier to maneuver. If you're like adjusting something on someone, they won't slip around as much, and it won't, like, it just glides over pins or whatever you use to hold your garment together. So yeah, I will recommend tailor's chalk for that, to get started, just to visualize these things, what you're doing, where you're going, what needs to be fixed. Yeah, I will always recommend tailor's chalk. Just that one's probably going to be the more expensive one of anything that you do, besides fabric if you get it on the roll. It may be more than $3 each. I know I picked these ones up for $2, but that's because I got it from a car boot sale. But yeah, that's honestly as easy as it gets. So if I do the math right, okay, so I've done the math. So for one small packet of needles, one spool of thread, one seam ripper, one tape measure, half a meter of interfacing, I'm just going to go for half a meter to get started, half a meter of poplin to get started, and then a packet of tailor's chalk, we're coming at about $15.30. And that is better quality products. That is $15.30 to get started. So if you're on a budget of $20, you're already under budget. You could splash out and get a second spool of thread. You could splash out and get a meter of poplin. You could splash out a little bit more. So if your budget is under $20, that is what I recommend. Those are the things that you need to get started, and the things that I recommend having nearby for emergency fixes if needed. But yeah, that's all you need to get started. Okay, so my camera's dying. It just shut off on me. So those are the things that you need to get started sewing for less than $20. Please avoid buying one of those dumb sewing kits. You really don't need those things. But yeah, I will do a video a little bit later on the things you don't need to get started with sewing. But yeah, all you need to do is to grab those things to get started, and then you can go on Pinterest or on YouTube and find some tutorials to get started hand stitching and how to build the confidence and things like that, because that's what we're doing here. That is what we're doing here. We're crafting confidence thread by thread. Okay? If anyone has any questions about the tools, or if there's any other tools that interest you and you would like to know a bit more, feel free to ask a question in the comments, because I will gladly reply to any comments regarding that. But yeah, I will see you guys later once my camera's charged up a little bit. Okay, bye guys! Happy crafting!